It can be a little bit of a dry topic, so I'm going to try not to make it too dry for you. And just going to go through kind of the basics of what a general plan is, and then welcome any questions that you might have. So I'm going to share my screen here, a little presentation. Oops, I almost left the meeting. Here we go. Okay. So, what is a general plan? So, in short, a general plan allows a community to create a vision for its future. It's basically a blueprint for how a jurisdiction will grow over an extended period of time. Generally speaking, that's about 25 to 30 years. California state law requires each city and jurisdiction to adopt a general plan for the physical development of the city or the county, whichever we're in, as well as any land outside of the boundaries of that city or county, but that is within the potential future build out of the community. So generally that's the voter approved urban growth boundary, which the city of Santa Rosa has. The general plan process expresses the community's development goals and includes public policy related to the distribution of future land uses, both public and private. A local general plan starts with a shared community vision that helps set priorities through the planning process and informs decision makers about community values and vision for the future. It also guides the city's planning and zoning functions, as well as the funding of public improvement projects such as parks and streets. So there are a number of elements or chapters, if you will, for a general plan. There are state required elements, which are listed here, and that's our land use, and that land use identifies things like areas where residential will go, or commercial or industrial, and then policies that help support the development of those various land uses. It includes circulation, so how we get in and about the city, and it's both, it's multimodal circulation. So it includes roads for vehicular travel, as well as bikes, walkways, and circulation for transit. Housing is a key element, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Conservation, open space, noise, safety, environmental justice, and air quality. Those are all state mandated required elements within a general plan. And then on top of that, the city of Santa Rosa has some specific elements or chapters that we have included over the years because they're pieces of our community that are important to the residents within the city. And that includes urban design, so how our city looks as it grows, public services and facilities, which goes over police services and other emergency services, things like libraries and other city facilities. We have our growth management element, which I actually find a little interesting now that, the city is, the state is mandating so much residential growth because of our need for housing. And the city has this somewhat outdated growth management ordinance that limits the number of housing units within our city. So that's actually something that we're going to be taking care of with our current update to our general plan to eliminate that section moving forward. But we also have youth and family, economic vitality, historic preservation, as well as arts and culture. So, what is the process for developing a general plan, and is there opportunity for public input? So these are really excellent questions. By California statute, general plans are required to be updated periodically. So there's really no set period or set timeline for how often a general plan should be updated. Traditionally, jurisdictions update their general plans about every 15 to 20 years. Some do it as often as 5 years. And then others just update it as needed throughout time. Really just kind of depends on the jurisdiction and the needs at the time. The housing element is the only portion of our general plan that is on a state mandated schedule. And that is every 4, 5, or 8 years. And the number of, and how often it's updated is set by the State Department of Housing and Community Development, which is also called HCD. So if a jurisdiction does not maintain certification of their housing element by the state, they are required to update it more frequently. So it gets to more that 4 or 5 years. The city of Santa Rosa has done a really excellent job over the years of maintaining certification with the state. So we have been consistently on an 8-year update cycle. The update process for a general plan is a public process. And we are currently updating, for anybody who isn't aware, the city has been in the process of updating our general plan. We started in 2020. It is the update process is called the General Plan 2050. So looking out to how the city will develop through the year 2050. Our current general plan goes out to 2035. And the community outreach process is extensive and has been extensive with this process. So as I mentioned, we started the update process in the summer of 2020. We're expected to be complete with our current update process in early 2025. And over the last few years, our outreach, and I've kind of got it listed here, and we've got a really neat tracker on our General Plan 2050 website that shows all of this. But we have completed over 120 events, meetings, activities, and surveys with our General Plan update. We've reached over 4,700 community participants through the process. We've engaged over 90 community groups, organizations, and neighborhoods. And we've received comments and ideas from over 26,000 individual community members throughout this process. So it really shows, the amount of effort that has gone in and the amount of interest from our community in this process, which is really key to moving this process forward. So the state of California does have a role in the update of general plans, and that is that they provide guidelines and technical advisories that help assist local governments with the development of the general plan. And so that really gets into more of the technical piece versus the vision piece that comes out of the community. The state also mandates the elements that must be in the general plan, which I just spoke about. And also the State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, reviews and certifies, as I mentioned, the housing element portion of the general plan. And they also review the required reporting that has to be done every year by each jurisdiction. So there are financial pieces to general plan, and that is with both the update process and the preparing of the actual general plan itself, as well as implementation. So for the update or creation of a new general plan, the city is responsible for paying for a consultant. It's usually a consultant team that helps city staff to prepare the general plan and its associated environmental impact report. The city of Santa Rosa, as well as most other jurisdictions, we collect long-range planning fees as part of building permits that come in throughout the year. And the fees that come in through that process help to fund our updates to the general plan, including that housing element that we have to update every 8 years. And without those funds, it would be very challenging for us to do the work that needs to be done with updating our general plan. The cost for implementation of the policies and actions that are within the general plan are a little bit different. That is generally funded by the city's general fund, but we also really utilize grant funding. We spend a lot of time researching and looking for funding options to help us with those implementation policies and actions. And that's to do things like implementing land use changes or public improvements to address new streets and roadways and parks and things like that. So consequences if a general plan is not approved by a jurisdiction. So as I mentioned, housing element, that's the only one that is mandated by the state on an 8-year cycle or less. So with the exception of that housing element, there are no legal consequences if the city does not update its general plan on a regular basis. However, having an up-to-date general plan allows for the city to stay current with evolving needs of the community, reflect current community values, vision for land use and development, and update technical information. A current general plan also allows the city to gain access to funding for activities such as affordable housing, which we all know is really needed right now. If a jurisdiction is sued over an inadequate general plan, which can happen, the court may impose requirements for land use decisions until the jurisdiction brings its general plan into compliance with state law. The consequences of not adopting and having a certified housing element, they get a little bit steeper. And so those can include lawsuits from housing rights organizations, developers, and the state. The courts can take local government residential and non-residential permit authority away, and also can suspend the jurisdiction's authority to issue building permits or grant zoning changes, variances, or subdivision map approvals. The city can also be subject to court-issued financial judgments, which can be fined up to $100,000 per month. Courts may appoint an agent with powers necessary to remedy housing element deficiencies, and the jurisdiction will be subject to streamlined ministerial approval of housing projects, which takes local control and the public review process away. So the consequences for that, not having that adopted and certified housing element, can be very steep. I am pleased to say that the city of Santa Rosa, as I mentioned earlier, we have always maintained compliance. And so we did adopt our housing element in February of last year on time. And we received high praise from the state, which included the designation of pro-housing, which is a huge accomplishment for the city. There's only about 47 jurisdictions within the state that have received pro-housing designations, which is granted based on the number of policies and programs that a city has to help promote new housing. And of those 47 jurisdictions that have received pro-housing, Santa Rosa is one of the top jurisdictions for that pro-housing designation. So it's really quite a great accomplishment that we've received. So what involvement do elected officials have with implementation? So the city council, as well as our appointed officials, which includes our planning commission, our design review board, cultural heritage board, board of public utilities, as well as some of our other smaller boards here at the city, are charged with implementation of the general plan and goals, and as well as the goals and policies and actions within the general plan. The city council is the final authority for adoption of the general plan. And then finally, all proposed projects within the city, both public and private, are required to comply with the general plan. And any approving resolution or ordinance associated with those projects requires a finding outlining how the project complies with the general plan. So that, kind of in a nutshell, is what a general plan is. As I mentioned, we're going through an update process of our existing general plan right now. So it's a great process, and I encourage everybody to be a part of if you haven't already. This is my contact information here, and then I am available for any questions. I will stop sharing.
Great. Thanks so much, Jess. That was good. So let's start off with the first question and just remind people, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Is the general plan posted for the public to view And if so, where is it?
Yes, that is an excellent question. So it is, our draft general plan is up and available on our website, which is Santa Rosa forward, all one word, .com. And we are in the process. So we did public outreach for the general plan over the last summer and then into kind of early fall, and received comments, broad ranging comments from the community as well as our various decision makers, including the planning commission and the council. So right now we're in the process of refining the general plan based on the comments received. But that draft document is still up and available if anybody's interested in taking a look at it. I would encourage you to do so.
And so the draft is up, but also the current approved one from
Yes, that is correct.
You're
Yeah, so
still there.
yeah, both of those documents are up and available.
Great, thank you. So you talked about the city getting the pro-housing designation, which is great, and the fact that we are one of the top is even more great. What does that get the city?
That's an excellent question. So yeah, so pro-housing designation, in addition to just being something that we're very proud to have to show that we really are doing everything that we can to help promote housing growth in the city. What it does is provide opportunities for the city to be competitive for grant funding to help get more funds for the development of housing, and in particular affordable housing.
Thanks. So there was a question about the environmental justice element. Can you talk, what is that, and can you explain it a little more?
Yes, that is an excellent question. So in 2016, the state Senate passed a bill, SB 1000, which is the Planning for Healthy Communities Act. And so with that, environmental justice is an element that is now required to be in a general plan. And so it really looks at the health, equity, and justice key aspects of the community. So this is a new element for the city of Santa Rosa, and one that we're excited to see move forward. Really trying to bring that health equity into not only the environmental justice section of the code, but have it reach all aspects of the code, looking at health and equity as it relates to land use and circulation, so that we are ensuring that everybody in the community, include populations that have not been well served in the past, are all served equally throughout the city.
Thank you. So the cities have a general plan and the county has a general plan. How do they mesh, or do they mesh?
That's an excellent question. One would hope that they would mesh well, but they don't always. Yeah, so the city and the county, we each have a general plan. It is, the cities is adopted by the city council, the counties is adopted by the board of supervisors, and the cities covers, the areas within the cities, within our city limits, as well as out to that urban growth boundary that I mentioned, which is a voter approved boundary. And so we don't go beyond that. The county is covering, it covers all the unincorporated areas. I'm trying to think, I don't think, it doesn't cover within the incorporated city, but it does cover areas within our urban growth boundary that have not yet been annexed into the city. And so really where it kind of converges on each other is when we have a proposed project that is coming into the county that is within the city's urban growth boundary, but hasn't been annexed into the city. And so then we have to look at what is the general plan vision for the county versus the city. And that's when we really have to get together and work together, both the county and the city, to make sure that projects being proposed to the county that could ultimately be annexed into the city are consistent with the city's vision. And so, you know, one area, I'm going to kind of get off on a little bit of a tangent here for just a moment, but so there's an area of the city in South Santa Rosa, that is from basically kind of Bellevue south to kind of Todd Road area, that is unincorporated county, but it's within the city's urban growth boundary. And we're actually starting the process of doing what's called a specific plan, which is basically kind of a step lower from the general plan. So the general plan is kind of this higher level policy, very high level document. The specific plan is coming down just a little bit lower, getting a little bit more granular, looking at more specifics of land use and circulation, the infrastructure to support development. And so we are looking at that area in South Santa Rosa right now. We've started the process of preparing a specific plan to think about how that area would develop. But most of that area is still unincorporated county. So we are partnering with the county right now on this process so that until such time as that area does get annexed, if development comes in the county, it will be consistent with the vision that the city has. So we're really trying to do, I think in years past, there hasn't been as much coordination between city and county. And we're really working hard to make sure that we have a better coordination. And with that, the county is working on kickstarting their general plan update process right now. And they've actually started including city staff in that process as well.
So somewhat related to what you just said about the areas outside within the urban growth boundaries, but outside the city limits. When Roseland was annexed into the city, that would be would that be an example of the city working with the county to make sure that the general plan that was in place in 2017 when the actual annexation took place was consistent?
Yeah. So so Roseland was an interesting process. You know, it was an area of unincorporated county that was completely surrounded by the city, and so it created a lot of challenges until it was annexed into the city, because we had very outdated county general plan land use designations, which created challenges with development in that area, so that when we did annex and bring it into the city, there were some challenges with just, you know, again, really focusing on the city's vision for development in that area. But it really highlighted, I think, the importance of coordination between the city and county. And we learned a lot through that annexation process about, again, I think really just comes down to the importance of the city and the county working very closely together, because we can't plan for the future of our county in general, let alone the city, without working together as a team.
So the specific plan that you're talking about in the south portion of Santa Rosa, because you can see my hand gesture, I'm saying south portion of Santa Rosa. How long does something like that take?
Good question. So the general plan process that we're in right now has taken, ultimately it'll take probably about 4 or so years. Specific plans, for the most part, take a little bit less time because we're focusing on a smaller area of the city. With the general plan, we're looking at the entire city, and it's just a much larger area to focus on. In my experience, so I've been here at the city for about 18 years, and I have processed a number of specific plans, and they usually take about 18 to 24 months. We do expect the process in South Santa Rosa to take about 24 months. We got started on it, I guess a couple months ago now. So we expect it to be completed in early 2026. And that will include, the process for the most part includes starting off with putting together an existing conditions report, which we're working on right now to really understand what's out in that area right now. Then with that information, we're going to go out to the community and do that outreach that I talked about to really talk with the people who live, work, and play in that area to understand what they want, what they see as a vision for this area. And we'll come up with some alternatives for both land use and circulation for that area for how it might develop in the next 20 or so years. And then once we have those alternatives developed, we're going to go back to the community, make sure we got it right, and form that down into a single vision for the area that we're going to press forward with. And so that process, including the environmental work that has to go along with it, usually takes about it'll take about 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to housing now. There are a number of questions around housing. So we have our regional housing needs assessment numbers that we need to meet. And we see a lot of building going on. Some of those are affordable units and some are not. What's the long range projection for meeting those RHNA numbers, do you think? I want you to get your crystal ball out, Jess, and
Okay.
tell me.
Describe what RHNA is.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jess. Sorry.
Yeah, so RHNA stands for Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And so RHNA is the number of housing units that the state of California says that each jurisdiction has to develop over that 8-year housing element cycle that I mentioned. And so the state, every 8 years, they come up with a total number of housing units that we need to develop in the entire state of California. And then with that, then they take it down by region and allocate a certain amount per region. And I'm not 100% sure how they take that full number and bring it down to the regional level. But so our region is the Association of Bay Area Governments, because we are, even though we're northern, we are part of the Bay Area. And so that's ABAG. And so the number for ABAG, then it comes to us, and I'm forgetting now what our total number was for this last period, but then all of the jurisdictions within the Bay Area come together, and we have representatives from each of the counties within the Bay Area, and we come up with a methodology as to how that bigger number should be spread out amongst the counties, and then within the county amongst the cities. And so that process takes about 2 years until we get the number that both the county and then each jurisdiction within the county has to plan for over that 8-year cycle. So for the city of Santa Rosa, our number is about 5,000, a little less than 5,000. And actually, for Santa Rosa, the number was about the same as it was during our last housing cycle. There's a number of jurisdictions, including the county, that had their numbers increased exponentially from the last housing cycle. But so now, we then take that number that we have to develop, the number of housing units that we have to plan for over the 8-year period. And that's how we start our working on our housing element process. So the housing element that we develop puts together policies and programs that will help us reach that goal of putting in those 5,000 new units by the end of that 8-year cycle. And so each year within the 8-year cycle, we have to report out to the state on how we're doing. And that total number includes a breakdown of market rate units, as well as moderate income units, low income, very low income, and extremely low income units. And so there's a specific number with each of those. And so we have to report out every year how we're doing in each of those categories. And I'm pleased to say we've sent our report to the state about a month ago, maybe now, with the last year's housing units that we put together. And the housing units are counted based on building permits issued. So that's when those units are counted. And as of right now, we are doing really well. I would say that we are on track to meet our RENA requirements, which is huge. The city has not in the past been able to meet our RENA requirements, and we're doing very well with all the, I mean, probably all seen a lot of the housing that's under construction right now, but all that is going to show that, you know, we're doing really well. There's, you know, definitely always work to do, but we are on track right now to meet our RENA, which we're very, very excited about.
Do you think that the increase in interest rates will have an effect on building more, especially multifamily units, or have you seen that?
That's a good question. I'm not a real estate professional and I'm not a developer, so I don't totally know. I will say that, you know, a lot of, from what I understand, a lot of the challenges with building new units is, I'm sure that interest rates have play a part in that, but I also know that the cost of materials and labor is a huge piece of that, and that's where, you know, the city is challenged. Because we can put in, you know, all of the, you know, ease regulations and ease permitting costs and, you know, do all these things to help streamline our process to get new housing units through. But, you know, we don't have control over the cost of labor and the cost of materials or interest rates. And so it really is a challenge. So I think the answer to your question, Karen, is probably yes. But I think there's a number of factors that go into it.
You talked about the greenhouse gas report that's going to be coming in the next couple weeks. Within that, are there variety? My assumption is that there are a variety of climate change measures and things that the city can do to help address our greenhouse gases. Could you just name a couple and explain them? Sorry.
Yeah, so I can talk about it on a very high level at this point.
That's fine.
Yeah. So thanks, Karen. It's a good question. So what Karen is mentioning is as part of our general plan update process, a key element to that update process is updating our city's community climate action plan. And that climate action plan was last adopted in, I think it was 2012. And so it's in desperate need of being updated. There's been lots of changes since that time. And so part of the general plan update that we're doing is what we're calling a greenhouse gas or GHG reduction strategy. And that will replace our existing climate action plan. And so the GHG reduction strategy is going to have a number of programs within it to continue the city's quest to reduce our impact on the climate. And so the state of California has requirements for reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And so we've got specific state targets that we have to meet by 2045. And so this GHG reduction strategy is required to show that the city will meet or exceed those state mandated reductions by 2045. And so the draft that we have prepared, which is going to be available first week of June, so in a couple weeks now, and is going to be presented to our Climate Action Subcommittee on June 5th, outlines the various things that we need to do as a city to reduce our impact on the environment as far as greenhouse gas emissions. And, one of those things is, looking at, ways that we can encourage new development to come in with, all electric rather than using gas appliances. And, doing what we can to get people out of their cars. Because really one of the biggest impacts on greenhouse gases is transportation. And so that's really been, I think, kind of the focus of, how we do that. How do we get folks out of their cars? So that'll be a big piece of this.
Thank you. Go back to housing for a minute. We see a lot of the multifamily units. Can you talk about the idea of infill rather than expanding to the edges of the community and kind of the theory behind that and how that's working?
Yeah.
What infill is.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And what infill is.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Okay. So infill is really looking at development and building of our community towards the core of the community. So rather than pushing out to the outer edges of Santa Rosa, it's looking at either redevelopment or development of vacant sites that are closer into the center of the community. And one of the important reasons why we want to look at infill development versus development out towards the fringe, and it really gets to that greenhouse gas reduction strategy, is to get folks living closer to services. And so if you're out on the fringe of the city, out on the edges, you aren't necessarily close to, shopping and access to transit and other services that you might need, versus if you're, closer to the center of the city, it's more walkable, easier to get to things that you might need. And so, infill development hits a lot of important pieces of the building of our community and, reaching our greenhouse gas strategies.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder to everybody, if you have questions, please put it in chat. If you're not comfortable putting it in chat, you can use the raise your hand feature. So when we saw the draft general plan at the Planning Commission a few months ago, I can't remember when that was, there was an equity component in there. Can you talk about that requirement? And is it a state requirement, or is it something the city has decided to do?
So kind of getting to the environmental justice.
Yeah, I mean, but there was also the environmental justice, but there was also the equity component around economic development. I'm probably not explaining it.
That's all right. So we have equity priority areas, which are areas of the city that, have a population that has been traditionally underserved, lower income. And, we're really trying to focus, I think, some of the development and diversion of services is really kind of focused on two things with our general plan. One is our equity priority areas, ensuring that, the areas within the city that have traditionally been kind of underserved are served by grocery, by public services, libraries and things like that. And then also focusing on areas that don't have that walkability. So it's kind of twofold. But yes, I think the equity priority areas are really coming into focus with this general plan. And it has a lot to do with the environmental justice piece of the process that we're adding to this new update.
Thank you. So let's talk about SMART for a minute. How's the city working with SMART on transportation issues and the reduction of GHGs?
So the city does work closely with SMART, so that's our Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit. And so we've got two stations, I think as everybody probably knows, here in Santa Rosa. We've got one downtown and one at Guerneville, up near the Cottingtown Mall. At one time, there was talk about putting in a third station in Santa Rosa, in the southern portion of the city, kind of in the area that I talked about that we're looking at for our specific plan. Right now, SMART is no longer looking at that as a future site, but it's something that our council wants to see kind of kept as an idea. But the city does work very closely and with SMART as well as our regional partners at ABAG and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission to try to focus our development near the SMART stations. And so two of the specific plans that we have done in the last 15 years, I guess, is our downtown station specific plan and our North Santa Rosa station specific plan. And with those, the city received grant funding from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission because they were areas that were around the SMART station. And so with both of those projects, we worked very closely with SMART to develop a plan that not only met the community's vision for those areas, but also helped provide a vision for intensified residential as well as non-residential uses in those areas. So really trying to bring people closer to the SMART station to enhance ridership. So both people living as well as working in those areas.
So let's stay on transportation just for a bit. So the transportation infrastructure, is that mentioned in the general plan?
Yes, so we have a transportation element, one of our chapters that is required by the state. And so that is, I don't want to put one element over the other, but it is an extremely important element of our general plan. And it really guides the future development of all modes of transportation, as I mentioned earlier. So it's really looking at how people move around our city, both in their car, in transit, on their bike, walking, and trying to make the city functional and providing policies that will help us to support transportation and future projects for transportation, and the policies within that element also ultimately make us competitive for grant funding from outside agencies to help us build our infrastructure for those.
So the city's undergoing the revision and creation of the active transportation plan. Will that be referenced as part of the general plan when it's done?
Yeah, so the general plan, as I mentioned, is this kind of big, high, broad policy document. And then there's lots of other policy documents within the city that are kind of fall underneath the general plan. Our specific plans are one of them, and our active transportation plan, which was previously known as the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan. They've renamed it to be more broad, to cover all modes of alternative transportation, including scooters and other wheeled modes. So they've called it the Active Transportation Plan, and yes, it is in the process of being updated right now. They're doing a lot of outreach for it, and so the Active Transportation Plan does need to be consistent with the general plan, and so any new policies that might be developed through this process, if there is any potential inconsistency with our general plan, we would look at amending our general plan to be consistent. We would either amend the general plan or amend the active transportation plan so that they're consistent with each other, so that they're talking with each other.
Great, thank you. Leona?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify I see some questions in here that have been that there are direct messages. If you have a direct message, you should probably send it to Karen, who's managing all the questions, or raise your virtual hand, either one. Want to make sure that everyone has a chance to ask their question.
Thank you. I am seeing a lot of the direct messages, but there may
You
be
are.
some I'm not. So there are a couple questions regarding housing and homeless. So can you, even though this topic is the general plan, can you talk a little bit about the housing element, which is part of the general plan, even though it's separate but together?
Yes.
And
Yes, separate, but yes, part of our general plan. So, it was a question specific to homelessness or?
One thing, let's see if I can find that question. It had to do with let's see, how does the plan address homelessness and housing insecurity?
So I am not the expert on the homelessness topic. We have our housing and community services department here at the city handles those issues, but we do have policy language that helps support the work that our housing and community services department does here at the city to help support and provide programs to address homelessness, housing insecurity, and really, try to put the city in a position to get, as I mentioned earlier, related to transportation, but it also relates to this too, put us in a position to get potential grant funding to help with the services that the city provides.
So I just had a question, but it went in and out of my mind. So, budget. So, since the general plan is the blueprint for the city,
Mhm.
and every year when the council during this time of the year, they decide on the budget and how the money that the city has is going to be allocated, do they refer back to the general plan and to make sure that the budget is consistent with the general plan?
So, yeah, so, each year with our budget, it is challenging. We have to ensure that we are implementing the various aspects of the general plan, and with the general plan, and we're doing this even more so this time around than we have in past cycles. We are creating an implementation strategy that outlines kind of priorities for each of the implementation measures within the general plan, and the departments within the city that would take lead on those programs, and then potential funding sources. So we really do try to utilize grant funding to the extent that we can. But there are, a lot of programs that, there just isn't grant funding out there for. And so we work with the city manager's office and with the city council each year for budget and goal setting to identify items within the general plan that need to be prioritized that next fiscal year and what the funding is necessary for that. Some of them are programs that take many years to implement. I can give you an example. In the transportation section, we've had a goal and a policy within our transportation section of our general plan for years to extend Farmers Lane. And so that's, it is an extremely costly project that is going to take various sources of money, grant funding from the federal government, different ways that we're putting it together. We hope one day to make that happen. But then there's other shorter term things, and really a lot of the shorter term programs and implementation that we have to do relate to the housing element. And so that is things that, we either work through the budget season to identify funding from the general fund to help us work on, or we utilize grant funding. And we've actually been very lucky in the last couple of years that the state of California has provided grant funding for housing related policy projects. And so we've been able to strategize and use that funding to the nth degree to get a lot of our programs done. And we're working on that now. So it's a continual work in progress.
Wow, listening to you, it makes me tired. So with that, can you talk a little bit about the department and staffing and what the organization of planning and economic development within the city looks like?
Sure. Yeah. So planning and economic development encompasses 4 sections. So it is planning, and within planning, as I mentioned earlier, we have 2 sections in our planning division. That is our advanced planning policy development section, and we have our current development team, which processes all of our new entitlement applications, reviews building permits for planning related items and that type of thing. So that's planning. We also have our building division, which processes all of our building permits that come in, both small and large. And we have our engineering division, which reviews projects, both city projects as well as private development projects, to ensure that projects meet our infrastructure requirements and our city street standards and various other standards within the city. So again, that's from a private development side, they review projects for infrastructure. From a public project side, they're really looking at ensuring that public projects like streets are built to city standards. And then we have our economic development division, which right now is very lightly staffed. We lost a few key members of that division, unfortunately, recently. But we are working on rebuilding it. As we all know, economic development in a city of our size is extremely important. And so with that, we actually just recently, council adopted a economic strategic plan for kind of the vision for the next 5 years for how the city is going to address economic vitality within the city. So those are the 4 main functions of the planning and economic development department.
Thank you. So I don't have any more questions unless anybody else wants to raise their virtual hand or put something in chat. Doesn't look like anybody. So Leona, is there anything else?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Jessica for her presentation. You've done an excellent job. And we will be